living in Colorado though for most of my adult life.
Yeah. Wait,
Yeah.
why do you think, are you not in Colorado? Are you in Costa Rica?
I'm in Costa Rica.
Yeah. Okay. So you're just, have you been doing COVID there?
Yeah, it's so different here than the States. We moved here in November, and sometimes it's like there's not even a pandemic.
Right. Totally.
Right. Yeah.
Amazing.
Where are you?
I'm in Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah,
I love Chicago.
Yeah. Oh, such a great city. Similar to New York, I
Yeah.
would say, in terms of the pandemic and how we're dealing with it.
Totally.
Hello, everyone. We are back. We figured out technology. We figured out daylight savings time. We're going to have to cut this a little bit shorter because of scheduling. So let's just dive in.
Great.
Jessica, a lot of people in the group are very familiar with your work. And so I'm not going to spend time going over it. At the end, I'll give you an opportunity to share where they can find your book and some of your other workshops and offerings right now. But I wanted to start with a question that I'm always so curious about, especially with people who practice polyamory, as you do. And I'm curious, what is your poly why?
My poly why? Ooh, good question. I think my poly why was initially when I was first read about it, it just felt like it was me. But I think what fueled the why was just like truly believing in love, and like this full expression of love and intimacy that shouldn't be confined by social concepts, to say it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. So I didn't really connect with polyamory until a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I learned about it and I learned about solo poly, I'm like, oh, that's me. I've never been someone who has like these big dreams of like getting married and sharing a home. And I'm not interested in having kids or raising a family. And like just really deeply value autonomy, my own and other people's and my own space. I'm super introverted. And so when I learned about polyamory, that really fit with my ideas. Esther talks about we now come to one person, what an entire village used to provide. And so I really resonate with this idea of I don't want to be like, she's mine, like that feels like really icky to me.
Totally.
I love this idea of being able to really appreciate a person and not need them to be something else because of my needs. Just being able to go into situations and like really value what the person brings. And if needs aren't getting met and they're not able to meet them after I communicate my needs, like being able to find other ways to get them met. And also this idea that we can have a relationship that really energizes us in a unique way. And then bring that energy to our other relationships in a way that like adds value to them.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I think one of the things I love the most about solo poly is this idea that like you're your primary partner, right? And I think everyone, regardless of their relationship structure, could benefit from like, what would it look like if I started to see myself as my primary partner?
100%. And that doesn't mean like, I don't need anyone and I can do it all by myself. It just means that we don't rely on only external sources to feel safe or to feel like needs are met. We rely on ourselves and we rely on others is kind of the way that we see it.
Exactly.
It was interesting because just earlier today, we were having a conversation in our community. And someone said, I think who's maybe familiar with polyamory, but not solo polyamory, said, isn't solo poly just a way that people don't take accountability or responsibility or like just like
don't actually commit? Yeah.
How would you respond to that?
Yeah. So I would say that is the myth. That's sort of the stereotype. And of course, it's not necessarily true. So many people I know that are solo poly definitely commit deeply, long-term relationships, decade relationships and more. It's just that they're not looking to entwine their life as that, coupling,
Yeah.
right? Just one or two people, right? Or entwine with finances or domestic life. Even I know solo poly people who actually live with their partners, but there's a certain autonomy that they're maintaining so that they can show up in relationship really fully, really cleanly with their boundaries. So yeah, it's not just that they're doing these other things, right? Or not taking responsibility. However, with that said, are there people who use their solo polyamory as a way to do some not great things in relationship? Of course, but we're going to find that in everything, right?
For sure.
In monogamy as well. Right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting too, because I feel like if you just get to the person's why, like if you ask them like, oh, what draws you to polyamory?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, I'm not really big into commitment and just kind of like to do whatever, you know, I'm feeling in the moment. Okay, that's going to give you a sense that that might be that type of person.
Yeah, that should be a yellow flag to ask more questions.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. If you're someone who's wanting commitment, right?
Yeah. It's funny because we have this ongoing debate in the group. There are kind of like two different camps. One camp is very into asking a lot of questions. And this is among people who practice polyamory or ethical non-monogamy. Some people like to ask a lot of questions up front, myself included. Other people are like, no, like it's better just to kind of go with the flow and just like feel out the energy and let it evolve organically.
Yeah.
And my thinking is like, there are so many different ways to practice polyamory, and there are so many different conceptions people have of what polyamory is. It's funny because on dating apps, people will kind of self-define as poly, and then I'll, you know, dive into that and try to figure out how they define it. And it's much more like swinging, friends with benefits, casual sex. And so I guess my question is, with all of the clients you've worked with and in your studies, what works? Can both work? Do you kind of like lean towards or advise one? And then can you also talk about that axis with like practicing polyamory, like more leaning towards like sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, or both?
Yes, great. Do you know your Myers-Briggs type, by the way?
Yeah, you want to guess it?
I'm guessing you're a J at the end. I'll give that.
So it totally depends on the thing. There are certain things that I'm very like, if I traveled a lot in college. I would like barely have the place booked by the time I'd get there. And I wouldn't plan anything in advance. I'm like, I'm just going to wake up and walk around. Right. There are certain things that I'm super un-J about. And then like everything related to this group, that's their Pharrell group, planning interviews, like I'm like hyper J. So I think it gets to my personality needs. If it's something related to a personality need, I'm very J. And everything else is super P.
That's funny. Yeah, because as you were describing the two camps, I was like, oh, it's kind of that distinction of the J and the P. And we're not just one. Yeah. Right? I mean, I tend, you know, from experience, I think I tend to lean more towards the asking more questions, because there's certain situations that I just know won't work for me anymore. And some people don't have that. Some people are like, they have way more, you know, flexibility in the situations that will work for them. So I think they can be more go with the flow, figure out as we go, you know, but I think there's a difference between, are you avoiding questions that actually matter, right? Versus we're going to explore and have communication, but yet not, you know, define this too heavily from the beginning. Like, can we organically let this connection evolve and see where it wants to go? But I would still be weaving in important questions throughout the way.
Yeah. It's interesting because I super value secure attachment and safe havens. We can talk about that later if you want. Yeah. But that is like absolutely critical for me. And if that's not going to be there, and if the person can't provide that, I'm like just super not interested, no matter how attracted to them I am. Totally. And I actually, that was like my first experience with polyamory. where I connected with a guy, and this is like how I got introduced to it. So the profile picture was just him. And I was interested. He listed like badminton and tennis, two things like I just absolutely adore. And when we matched, then I looked at the rest of his pictures, and it was him and his partner. So they were looking to open up for the first time. He had been ethically non-monogamous before. She was monogamous. They met, they kind of like closed things off and were looking to open them up. And in my head, I was coming to the experience like really wanting like emotional connection and intimacy. And I think that he really was drawn to that too, but only if his primary partner was like super cool with everything going on. And as soon as she was feeling like iffy or on the fence about it, the way that he practiced ethical non-monogamy was to kind of like completely close things off, deal with it, tell me to like hang tight. I'll be back soon, but I can't tell you when. And that was like, I had some pretty traumatic childhood experiences with my mom being manic bipolar.
Yeah.
And also I know that you talk a little bit about epigenetics, and my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And I believe that there's a lot of that with my mom and myself. And so it was, yeah, it just was like really the opposite of what I was looking for. And so now, like kind of just taking the lessons from that experience, I really like to know what I'm going into. Like, is this a situation where they're absolutely not going to be able to offer me that safe haven and that secure attachment? So throwing around a lot of terms, do you want to maybe share how you define those in Polysecure?
Yeah, so this is, in even the mainstream literature on attachment, but also in Polysecure, of safe haven and secure base. And so safe haven is, we're normally thinking about it in parent to child or caregiver and child, but in partnership, it's who I can go to and I'll be received. They're my safe haven to support me, to help co-regulate and soothe with me. They're the person I can open up to, and it's safe, and I can share myself and reveal myself in a non-judgmental way, right? And then secure base is sort of, okay, once I get like comfort and reassurance from you, I can actually turn away. Secure base are the people that like encourage us to go out and explore the world, to take risks, to take adventures, right? Or they might be the partners that like challenge us to look at certain things, right? And that's more about growth. So safe haven's more about comfort. And, secure base is more about, can we grow together, or can I support your growth in relationship?
Got it. That's helpful, because one of our group members who's polyamorous had asked about that distinction.
Great. Yeah. One of the things I talk about in the book is, as you even quoted, I think, right, Esther Perel talking about, we're expecting one partner to do what a village gave us, right? In mainstream attachment literature, we can expect our partners to be both our safe haven and our secure base. And in non-monogamy, it's great. We can have some partners that are more safe haven partners, more secure base partners, or a blend of those.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be everything or nothing, or just either or.
Yeah. I realized I totally derailed you from sharing about that axis. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So you want to hear about the axis. How do I do it right without paper and pen? So on one side of the axis, we have, let's say, sexual exclusivity.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, maybe back up. So there's so many ways to define all the different ways people practice consensual non-monogamy. And this is not the only way. It's just one of the ways I came up with to make sense of it. And so I came up with two axes of, we have sexual exclusivity to non-sexual exclusivity, right? And then we also have emotional exclusivity and non-exclusivity. Right? So in monogamy, it's typically, high emotional exclusivity and high sexual exclusivity, right? And then swingers might be, of course, there's caveats to all of these. I'm not trying to, rigidly define anyone, but they on this axis could be more emotional non-exclusivity. I'm sorry, sexual non-exclusivity, but still having more emotional exclusivity.
Yeah.
Right. right? Whereas polyamory, whether it's, partnered or solo, is going to have more non-exclusivity, both socially, sexually and emotionally.
Right. Based on how you define it, but not necessarily a lot of people in the dating pool who self-identify as polyamorous.
Exactly. So it's not meant to, ossify anyone into a type, but it's like, where in yourself do you find, right? How high or low do you feel in your sexual exclusivity or non-sexual exclusivity, and then that emotional access too?
Yeah. Super helpful question, I think, to cover as a J, as a hyper J in dating.
Like, I love the checklists and
yeah, I've got my whole list of questions. Let's dive in. Okay, so I had a question. You had shared that early on in your career you had studied the genocide in Rwanda, and people who, instead of being killers, were rescuers. And the common link among rescuers, you learned, was the narratives and beliefs they grew up with and the attachment experiences they had. And I just thought that was fascinating, and quickly was curious if you could share, like, what are the implications of those findings for our own attachment styles and our relationships and how we show up in them?
Great. Yeah. I'm so glad no one catches that research that was like a big part of my life for a long time. Right. And it was just so profound to see that the people who who actually rescued, right, who were truly embodying peace during a genocide, were the people that had all of these role models and these positive attachment experiences. Right. And then the people, I would speak to all of these people who killed during the genocide, and I would ask them pretty plainly, like, didn't anyone tell you that killing was bad? Right? And most of them looked at me honestly and said no. And all of them had these stories. And I would say, did you have role models in your life? Did you have people that, modeled altruistic behavior or kind behavior? And none of them had that in their life. Right. And so it shows us the significance of the positive role that attachment figures can have, and then also the impact when there aren't attachment figures, to teach us what it means to sort of nurture each other.
Yeah. But I think the positive side of that is, like, all of this is just like learned and conditioning. And if we can be conditioned to, like the anxiously attached people, or the avoidant people, if those are our compensatory strategies to the nurturing we got or didn't get, all of it can be unlearned and all of it can be relearned in healthy ways. And there's so many tools out there for that.
Exactly.
Okay. You tell this great story about Airbnb in one of your interviews that, to me, just really exemplifies how the structure of polyamory, and how it being inherently an insecure structure, can illuminate jealousy in a poly relationship in a way that might not surface in a monogamous one. Can you share that story?
Was that the one you heard with the leveled up love?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, so this is a story about what I call justice jealousy, which I make distinctions of jealousy. So we have, typical possessive jealousy. We have envy, which is, oh, I want that too, right? Even though I'm happy you have it, I want it too. We have primal attachment panic, which isn't jealousy, but it's often confused as it, where you're in an attachment primal panic experience that's usually mislabeled as jealousy. And then there's justice jealousy. And these aren't the only types, of course. But so the story is, my partner that I opened up from monogamy to polyamory with, we were, monogamous for 6 or 7 years. And in that time, he's a P, I'm a J. And so it was like, I came to accept there was just things he wasn't going to do because it just wasn't him. Right. So when it came to planning trips, he couldn't plan well. He would misplan things. Right. He just couldn't even see the button on the website, just be like. And I would ask, though, I wanted just some romance. I wanted dates. I wanted just plan a picnic for me, or plan a hike. It doesn't have to even be money. Right. It's just after years of asking and really not getting, it was finally I came to just be like, it's not who he is.
Yeah.
I accept him. I love him. And I'm going to accept I just won't get this here because I get it. Other things, so many other things, right? Fast forward, we open up and him and this woman have this great connection. I'm so excited for them. They're going to have their first sleepover. I think I initially thought it was at her house. And then I get a phone notification from Airbnb. It's like, I booked a room, right? And I'm like, oh, what is this, a mistake? And then I realized, hell no. Like, he's on my computer in my login on Airbnb because he doesn't even have his own account, right? Booking a room for her, right? And it wasn't the jealousy that I didn't want her to have it or I didn't want him to have it. It was like, I have been pleading for you to do, like, take initiative for years, and the pain and the feeling of rejection, right, that comes with, like, why didn't you do this for me? Like, suddenly now you have the skills. Yeah.
So, and you also talked about, you gave the example of how that can be similar to sexual desires, where we might be wanting a certain type of sexual experience from our partner, whether it's kink or BDSM or whatever it might be. And they're just like totally not into it, not feeling it for years, decades. And then we learn they have a new partner and they're all about it.
Suddenly they love oral sex and you haven't been able to get oral sex at all. And so it's not just jealousy. It's like, oh, why couldn't you do this for me? Like, what was happening here that I wasn't enough, so to speak, right?
Okay, so it's such a great example. What advice would you give to someone in that situation?
Yeah, so the advice is first that this isn't an individual issue that you have to go figure out on yourself. It's a relationship issue, and so it needs to be worked out in this relationship. And what I normally see and we have to admit is there's been neglect. Like, oh, you've actually been neglecting this relationship. And what needs to sort of come back alive here or be bolstered so that this relationship is needing more attention, in order for this not to continue.
I could imagine, let's say I was the guy, the booker of the fated Airbnb in that situation, and someone said you've been neglecting your relationship. I could see how I might go on the defensive. So
absolutely.
How do you have the conversation from a place of expressing desires and also kind of like holding that other person accountable for their side of the relationship without like blaming or accusing?
Totally, right. Not leading with you're neglecting this relationship, which I wouldn't do in a session, right? But it is talking about like, okay, it's really in long-term partnership, it's really common that we start to take our partners for granted.
Yeah.
And it's even neurobiological that we will automate our partners, right? So in the same way, when we first started driving, every ounce of our brain was focused on all the different things and pedals and we had to do. And then as we learn it, we automate it. So now I can have a phone conversation or listen to the radio or eat a sandwich while I'm driving, right? Mm-hmm. We do the same thing to our partners. Yeah. So I'll usually explain it that way. Like, it's unfortunate, but we automate each other, right? And then we don't hear each other's bids, right? We don't take them as seriously, not because we don't love them, but we sort of have taken for granted, like, well, you're always going to be here. And I don't have to put my best foot forward the way that I do with this new person to like keep them around. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So I think it's exposing that.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I love that example. And I just think it's so perfect for exemplifying how in monogamy, obviously stuff is going to come up, but it's just such a perfect example of how it's so in your face in polyamory. Yeah. And how important it is not to like personalize it and make it about you. Like, oh, I wasn't good enough for the Airbnb, and just realize that some of the dynamics you're sharing, it's like that newness, that novelty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So in one of your other interviews, you shared both monogamy and hierarchical polyamory utilize external structures to create a feeling of security in a relationship, but they don't necessarily address the internal secure functioning of the relationship.
Yes.
And I thought that that was such an interesting observation. Was curious if you could kind of explain what you meant by that.
Yeah, yes. So, and we're not poo-pooing hierarchical polyamory or monogamy in this, right? But what happens a lot of the times is structure is used. I'm on top, right? Or I'm number one, or I'm the only one, right? Or I have veto, to feel secure in the relationship. And what I see is that usually isn't actually sufficient, right? When we just rely on structure, then we can fall into the trap of actually taking each other for granted, or not creating the relational secure attachment, which says, oh, I feel secure and safe with you because of actually how you show up with me and how I show up with you, right? How we're treating each other, not just the fact that, you know, we have kids, so it's hard for you to leave.
Yeah.
Or we're married and that's hard to just undo, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because, again, as a solo poly person, I'm often entering into other people's dynamics.
Right.
And often like learning that there's hierarchy and like not really any longer being interested in exploring it. Because it does feel like there's a lot of, okay, we're going to try to create this structure that puts a lot of restrictions on anyone entering the dynamic, meaning myself, versus like creating that security from within, but also within the primary partner's connection as well.
Yeah. Right. Where that structure isn't allowing or disallowing you from getting some attachment needs met in that relationship.
100%. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so really quickly before we go into group member questions, we use the acronym HEART, H-E-A-R-T, to depict some specific ways you can create secure attachment and a safe haven in relationships. Can you quickly talk through those?
Yes. So HEART, H is for here. It's about being present and doing your best to be undivided in your presence. So it's not just physically being here, it's the quality of your presence. Right? E is expressed delight, which sometimes people confuse it for words of affirmation, but it's more than just that. It's not just words. It's the felt sense of the way you ooze off of you, the like, I love you, I adore you, right? And it's expressing delight in your partner's beingness. So not just what they do for you, right? Not the needs they meet, but just their being aliveness. Then
can I just interject? I feel like within the 5 love languages, of which words of affirmation is one, they kind of leave out humor and playfulness, which for me is like such a key love language.
Yes.
And I've noticed in important relationships in the past, like almost having this like secret language and like banter and playfulness with words, which isn't words of affirmation, but it's like, I know you, and I know this thing I'm going to say is like going to give you a giggle, and it's going to create closeness. And I see that as a part of expressed delight as well.
I really love that. I agree with you. And I've heard people say, like, I know someone knows me when they can tease me, right? When they can like get me to laugh at myself, right? So it is that, you know, or I'll say for me, the 6th love language is like being asked questions. Like if you could ask me good probing questions, you got me. Right?
One of my friends also said one of her love languages is when someone knows exactly the type of podcast she'd want to be sent.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. So that is the next one, the A, which is attunement.
Yeah.
Right. So in our HEA, which is tuning in, you know, knowing someone for who they are, or in the moment, tuning into what's going on with them, separate from yourself. Right. And then R is rituals and routines, having those in our relationship, which could be mundane and everyday, cute little, sweet little rituals that we do, routines, to big, you know, rituals and rites of passage that we can sort of create for our relationships. And then T is turning towards after conflict. So it's how, when there's been ruptures, how do we turn back towards each other and repair?
Amazing.
Yeah. And the S at the end is secure attachment with self, which is how you view the heart onto yourself.
Amazing. Side note, Esther just did, I think it was last month, she did a whole workshop on routines and rituals.
Oh,
I don't know if you caught it, but if people are looking for some fun examples, it's definitely been shared in the group a few times.
awesome.
Okay, so we have some group member questions.
Great.
So the first is, how does one get past feelings of possession to make polyamorous relationships work? Are we born with feeling this way, or can it be changed? I feel like I have a traditional view, and those feelings are at odds with my desire for greater sexual expression.
Great. You know, I can't actually speak to whether we're born this way or we're not. And yet there's something really primal in a lot of us that feels kind of possessive sometimes. And I think what's important is not to deny that. I think a lot of people are doing themselves a disservice by being like, because polyamory is so much about non-possessiveness, that we can't also simultaneously utilize moments of ways to healthfully express that, right? Not in a full-on monogamous possessive way, though, right? So the way I work with it with people is I'll have people work with paradigm shifting, and you write all the beliefs of one paradigm, and then what's the new story, and you update it. And we have to go through that sort of examples of those different things. So there's some good resources out there, like how do you switch paradigms is one. But then also for people who feel a lot of possessiveness, exploring, well, for one, is there any insecurity going on with you or any past, traumas or attachment wounds that we need to heal, right? And then also, are there ways to healthfully cultivate possessiveness in a sex moment, in a sex scene, right? Where it has an expression that's consented to by your partner, let's say, and not actually restrictive to your partner.
Oh,
those are a few different ways I would work with it.
Yeah. I think so often in life, in relationships, for sure in polyamory, it's the sense of like, if there is a lot of discomfort around the experience, make that experience go away.
Yeah.
Versus getting curious about, okay, what is the story I'm telling myself about this situation that's causing the discomfort?
Yeah. Or I don't know if you know the book Existential Kink.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the whole process that she's doing is how we like really own our shadow. Just like, oh yeah, like I am possessive, but not in a prideful way, but like we own it so that we can transcend it.
Totally.
Instead of just pushing it away. Yeah.
I was listening to an interview. Have you heard of Kasia Urbaniak?
No.
She wrote the book Unbound. She has a TED Talk. She was a very successful dominatrix in New York City for about 2 decades. And she became a dominatrix to fund her Taoist nun training, which was all about like presence, attention, and now is kind of like living her purpose by teaching women the ways in which they give up their power.
Yeah.
Freezing in work or relational situations, not saying no, the people pleasing, all of it.
Yes.
And she's just brilliant to listen to and talk to.
Awesome. I will write it down. Yeah.
Yeah. And she just came out with her book, Unbound. Which she narrates. And you can imagine anyone who's becoming a nun is working intensely with breath work, which translates to like the vocal energy, and just the way that she narrates the book is like really powerful, I thought.
Thank you.
I was listening to an interview she did on Sex with Emily, the podcast. Mm-hmm. And there was a listener question, a couple, I think they were like in their mid-20s that grew up in a very conservative religious home in Indiana. And all of the messages they got about premarital sex were like horrible, negative, shaming. And then as soon as they were married, they were actually like pressured a lot to like be having sex and starting a family. And it just was very confusing. And so what Kasia recommended is, she said, make a list of all of the things that you're ashamed of, and then share them with your partner. And no matter what your partner's initial reaction is, they have to reflect back to you, that's so hot, or like, that's so sexy, or that turns me on so much. And she talked about how shame is often the kind of like the bedrock or source of our greatest eroticism. She also shared an example in the book of there was a guy who had a very small penis, not just like small comparatively, but it was actually like deformed in a way. And he came in and he just stripped off his pants. And, you know, in dungeons, sex is illegal. So it wasn't going to turn into a sexual thing. But she could feel in that moment his shame. And she started out by saying, she like made a comment like, your dick is so small. But then she flipped it and said, you must have gotten so good at like the kinkiest, craziest, most amazing sex because of it. And then they used that to like play out a whole scene. And she said it was like one of the most like erotic experiences she had in the dungeon. And so I just share that, like, oftentimes we turn away from shame, but really it's the leaning into it that allows us to like tap into some of our most erotic sides and can be some of like the most powerful experiences.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to be writing a book on shame. And one of the ways I talk about it too is it's access to a huge part of our aliveness. Because it's holding our vulnerability, right? Which is open and raw.
100%.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because I'm a total attachment theory junkie. I learned about it about a year ago after dating someone super dismissive avoidant, and coming from like, you know, my dad, he's a psychologist. He's like cracked open emotionally, like so comfortable with feelings. And I just had never experienced emotional unavailability before dating this man, and was like so confused. I'm like, if you feel connection, like, why would you pull away from it? Like, why wouldn't you lean into it? Like, it just was so foreign to me. So that was like what helped me, or that's what attracted me to attachment theory. Really, helped me to understand it. Why did I start talking about this? Attachment theory.
You were talking about shame and sort of leveraging that as eroticism, and then
I totally don't know why I started talking about it.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Okay, we'll keep going. Let's try to do one more question. Okay, so this was a question from someone who said, this is a quote from Polysecure, ... develop an appreciation for the attachment survival adaptions you took on. In my observations, people tend to describe avoidance more negatively. My ex leaned avoidant, I lean anxious. Can you help me understand how I can like appreciate and celebrate these adaptations with my partners, even when they're like triggering for me?
Totally. Right. So knowing our partner's history can be really helpful, where you go, oh, if I went through that, I probably would do that too. Right. So even as you just described this ex, like, if you want connection, how could you, right, pull away? Well, I immediately think, well, right, somewhere along the way, he learned and experienced that connection was dangerous, that connection was smothering, that connection took away his sense of self, right? Or that connection wasn't even available, right? So that he had to just withdraw into himself. So, knowing our partner's history can be really helpful to bring more of that compassion to these styles and realize that they are wise adaptations that someone is doing.
Yeah. I totally remember why I shared that story now. So I shared the story because this guy who sparked my journey into attachment theory learning was just so witty and smart and great with words. And that was what originally drew me to him. And that as we deepened intimacy, it just became so clear when there was just a modicum of like vulnerability or emotional intimacy or like being seen, he like retracted.
Yeah.
And, we were talking earlier about the Kasha Urbaniak and the story about shame. And I realized it was like almost like hitting a wall. Like we've gone as far as like the witty conversation can take us. And I want like the juice of vulnerability and like, you know, someone sharing a shameful part of themselves and like the intimacy that comes from that. Yeah. And yeah, it felt kind of like bumping up against a concrete wall because I didn't have that.
You couldn't access it.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. I wish we could just go on for eons, but when your next book comes out, we'll for sure have you back.
Totally.
And in the meantime, can you share with the group the book, where they can find it, any workshops or courses or online trainings you have coming up?
Great. The book is through Thorntree Press, so you can go to Thorntree Press's website and get it there. It's also on Amazon and several other places, and the audiobook's on Audible. My website is jessicafern.com. And I actually am working on my events page. I have so many events coming up and I don't have them on my website. But if you subscribe to my website, then when I have, you know, different events coming up, courses or other things that I'm a part of, like the Leveled Up Love that's coming out in April, right? I will announce those so people can learn from there. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad we were able to make this work. Yes. Thank you so much for this really landmark work. It's kind of like taken the polyamory community by storm, I feel like. Mm-hmm. So thank you for putting it out there and for helping people in the way that you are.
Totally. And thank you for supporting it. This is how it's out there. So thank you.
Beautiful. Okay. Thanks to everyone who joined. We'll catch you in the group soon. Bye, Jessica.
Bye.
Thanks again. Bye.